a dream come true. Getting to be working full-time in space projects, that was something that I have been working for very hard for many years. And finally, I had my chance to work at NASA and contribute to those missions.
Welcome to LatinX Can, a podcast showcasing Latinx professionals who turn their dreams into realities. I'm your host, La Doctora Yajaira Flores Delgado, and today I'm here with Dr. Yajaira Sierra Sastre, a chemist who dreamed of becoming an astronaut as a little girl and created the opportunities that landed her a job at NASA. And she's here to tell you, sí se puede, my friends, sí se puede. Dr. Yajaira Sierra Sastre, welcome to LatinX Can.
Thank you, Yajaira. Thank you for having me over. Thank you.
I'm excited. I told you already, but I think we've come a long way from a year ago. Was it a year ago in 2021 when I saw you on TV during the Perseverance launch? And it was just such a great time. And I've talked about this a lot. I didn't grow up understanding what representation means. But when I saw you on the screen and talking to Dr. Trujillo, I was like, man, these two women are like killing it. And I have to have them in my podcast. So here you are. And I'm super excited about this.
Thank you. Thank you for that. It's always a pleasure and an act of service and an honor, right? To be the face of these awesome missions and awesome human endeavors and be there representing our community and reminding our community that we do belong. We do belong in these spheres.
Absolutely. So let's start by talking a little bit about your story and where your story begins.
Excellent. So I would say my story begins in Puerto Rico. I was born and raised the island of Puerto Rico in the town of Arroyo. And I always say that my story as a scientist, as a space professional started there. The beautiful nature, the night sky, looking up at that beautiful night sky and falling in love with the stars. That's what really instilled in me that this passion I have for science, this passion I have for the universe, the curiosity I have to explore the universe. So everything started in Puerto Rico, and I am very thankful for the place I was born and feel very lucky that Puerto Rico was my backyard. Puerto Rico was my laboratory. And also as part of my upbringing, participating in science fair projects, I always go back to those elementary school science fair projects and middle school science fair projects. And I realized, hey, a scientist was being born back then. I didn't have to get to college or grad school. A scientist was being born back then.
Yeah, I used to watch the movies when I was in Venezuela, and you would see the science projects when the kids needed to do that and their parents would help them in the movies. And I was like, I wonder what that's like. We never really had things like that. But yeah, I wonder, and I was reading some of the articles that you write, and you mentioned that you did study in Puerto Rico and you did your bachelor's degree in Puerto Rico in chemistry. But at some point during your journey, you found it hard and you're like, I might just move on with my life and do something different. But you also mentioned that your mom really emphasized the importance of education because it changed her life.
Yeah, that's correct. So my first passion, in college, right, for science was chemistry. I fell in love with the field thanks to a wonderful professor I had, Professor Ibelis Padilla at the University of Puerto Rico, Mayaguez. The passion that she put in teaching these complex chemistry concepts, and both the passion and her ability to explain these concepts in ways that were easily to be understood inspired me to explore that field of education. I can tell you, I never imagined growing up. I mean, like I think about and try to remember if there was an instance during my upbringing, right, when I was in school, middle school, high school, where I seriously considered becoming a teacher. But it was at that moment I realized, hey, I was pursuing my bachelor's degree in chemistry. I was in love with chemistry back then as a field of knowledge and science, but I also saw an opportunity to contribute to the field of education, to find ways of revolutionizing how science was taught back then. And I believe that journey also started through a lot of introspection. And I say that I have always been I have always dealt with existential questions in my life. Since I was little, I can tell you, like, even looking up at the sky or asking questions about what are we doing here, or sitting at the stairs in front of my house and looking at the horizon and kind of like pondering and wondering what is out there. Since very little, I wanted to be an explorer. And I believe that journey of like trying to find purpose. I mean, it was a combination of being curious but trying to find purpose and answering those questions of what is my purpose here on earth? At that time in my career and my life led me to choose that career path, to finish my bachelor's degree in chemistry, but also take the necessary courses in education to get certified as a high school chemistry teacher. So that was my first job, was high school chemistry, and I loved it.
Yeah, yeah. And I wonder, during your career, that was your first job. You started teaching as a high school math and chemistry teacher. And it wasn't a super long career. It was maybe a couple of years. And then you decided to move from Puerto Rico to Ithaca, New York, to Cornell University to do your PhD. Tell me more about your experience as a teacher and whether that influenced your decision to then pursue a PhD.
Oh, great question. Great question. So I can tell you, I love being a teacher. I loved it. I felt fulfilled with the mission that I was serving, educating these young students. But it was a temporary position. And back then, many people, including myself, were struggling with the lack of job offers and with the job market at the moment in Puerto Rico. As I mentioned earlier, there was still this fire within me of wanting to explore the world, wanting to go on an adventure. So I believe it was a combination of life circumstances, and with that, I have become more of a practical person, because things can come our way that are unexpected. And that sometimes life circumstances are not great. And it's what we do with that to create new opportunities, to reinvent ourselves. That's what will keep us going forward. So it was that combination of things that made me revisit at the end of my term as a teacher, made me revisit some ideas I had early on about, becoming a scientist, maybe like reconnecting with that fire and flame that was burning for research. And also I remember having the thoughts of, I can take a break from teaching and go to grad school, explore a career path in research. And I remember as a teacher thinking, the more technically competent I become in this field, that will make me a better teacher as well. But it factored in my decision to pursue grad school. But before going to Ithaca for my PhD, I should say, I had what we call now post-bac, a research experience.
Oh, yes.
After college, as I'm saying, I became a teacher. And at the moment, I thought, okay, so a way to start transitioning my career to a research, a way to do that is to find an opportunity to participate in a summer research project. And since I was a teacher back then, I looked for opportunities for summer research experiences for teachers. So I actually went to Stanford as a teacher, as a high school teacher, chemistry teacher, and was part of a summer research project that was dedicated and intended to be for teachers. And at the end of that summer, so I went to California. That was the first time I was leaving the island, being in the US mainland. The first time I was fully immersed in English. So I was not fluent in English back then. I was lucky to have been surrounded by very patient and very good people back at Stanford. Yeah. And after 2 months, I realized, hey, even with all these challenges I had with English as my second language, I realized that, hey, I was able to do this. So it was a very empowering moment, because I'm like, at the end of it, I learned research, I learned science. I was able to present a poster summarizing my research findings. And I said, I can do this. And I returned to Puerto Rico like super empowered. I said, hey, I think I can become a scientist. I can do research. I was able to do it under the most stressful and challenging circumstances, right?
And that is a challenging situation for sure, because if it's anything like my story, when I started learning English, I learned English, the foundations before, but then I studied at an international school and in Eswatini in Southern Africa. My first class, it was in the IB diploma, and it was chemistry. And I loved chemistry at home, but we were learning orbital splits and just electronic configurations for atoms. My teacher was doing these things on the board, and I'm like, I don't understand anything. I don't understand the English. I don't understand the chemistry. I don't know what's going on. And it's super exhausting because your brain is working at 300% every time. And then at the end of the day, you're like, I haven't done anything, but my head is about to explode. It's such a challenging position that when you realize, you find challenges in the future, like throughout my career, I've found challenges. I'm like, this is nothing. At least I understand what they're asking, know?
Yeah. And for Puerto Ricans, right, as American-born citizens, dealing with the assumptions, because, okay, she's American, but the reality for many of us back in the island, if you are not from the metropolitan area, if you are not from San Juan, if you come from rural Puerto Rico, yes, you take classes in English when you're in school, but back then growing up, I didn't have access to cable TV or opportunities to practice it and to be more immersed. So it was a challenge, and is still a challenge for many people back in the island.
Yeah. And so after graduating from your PhD, you worked at a couple of startups while weathering the 2007-2008 recession. And in addition to the many skills you amassed during these years, you continue to relentlessly pursue your passion for space exploration. And it was during this time that you found a posting about the Hawaii Space Exploration Analog and Simulation. And you applied for a 4-month-long experience to sort of live in Mars while still being on Earth. Following your career trajectory, one of the things that I noticed is that you like to put yourself out of your comfort zone. And, you went to Puerto Rico, to Ithaca, which is polar opposites, literally, and then you go and put yourself on Mars. And so I wonder, what was that Mars analog mission like, and what were the skills that helped you be successful in this science experiment in which you were the subject yourself?
Okay, I should say that I have not always enjoyed being uncomfortable, right? Or being in uncomfortable situations. That's tough. But, and I know that, Yajaira, you can relate to this. When you live in that uncomfortable zone for so long, you get very good at it, very good at being comfortable with being uncomfortable. And that's that's one of the lessons that this Mars analog mission that you have described taught me. So this HISES, the Hawaii Space Exploration Analog and Simulation Project, was like another time in my life and career where I basically decided, let me give it a try. I have always had this dream of flying to space someday. And then back then I had already finished my PhD. NASA was opening positions for the NASA astronaut candidate program. So I saw this as an opportunity to, hey, maybe I can increase my chances of being selected someday and apply to this mission, which was awesome. It was Basically, I lived my astronaut dream without escaping Earth here on Earth.
Yeah.
And that mission, and I have talked a lot about this mission and what we did. It was a simulation. We wanted to better understand the risk associated with having a crew of 6 people in conditions of confinement and isolation, understanding, crew cohesion, crew dynamics that need to be well understood before we send a crew to Mars. And other things like science, like a space food study, which because food in space is something that is really important. So we did a lot of research, and I mean, I was a researcher. I was living and working like an astronaut on Mars, and doing research like astronauts will do on future missions to the red planet. Yeah. But when you ask me about, what lessons I got from that intense adventure, again, living in confinement and isolation, not being able to communicate with family members for 4 months, being like in this camp tent or simulated habitat with limited use of water and rationing, food and water, and going out to explore lava tubes, wearing these, heavy simulated spaces. So it was a dream, but it was like, it actually like was a very good experience to realize that, wow, I can actually do tough things. One of the things I realized, and one of the lessons learned or takeaways from that experience, is that I went there wondering if I was going to be able to first survive and help the team to work together, to be successful with this mission. I didn't know what was going to be like for me, right? And one of the things that I realized is like, wow, I kind of thrived in that environment, in that context. And let me tell you why, because it's one of the big things that I learned about myself. Even though we were kind of like confined, like because this was like a prison, you could not go outside without wearing that simulated spacesuit. So we were there in this small space, but that was not a problem for me. I mean, I come from a very big family, Latino family, Puerto Rican family, where we had to share space. We had to share space at home in the house, where the concept of personal space is not really important. And as Latinos, Latinx people, we understand this. I mean, we understand that our culture, our lives revolved around community. And that's something that I learned that I could, part of the reason why I had a really good time on Mars, on this pseudo Mars, is because we had to create a community during those 4 months to survive this challenge and to be successful with this challenge. And I know how to do that. So I was able to contribute to creating community, right? So that was one thing that made me realize, hey, as a Hispanic, as a Latina, when I applied to the project and eventually got selected, and then when I showed up, right, to be part of this important project, that's the type of contributions I can bring to the table. I call it like bringing out the Martian within you, your uniqueness to the table, your community values. My skills with biculturalism. Now that I am living in the States, it has been almost two decades that I have been here in the United States. So these biculturalism skills that we develop over time, they are very suited for this type of like team environments, right? And getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. I did not invent the phrase. I thought that I did, but no. Eventually, I found a lot of people use the same phrase. And what I mean with that is, and this is what I would like to encourage our community to try, is don't let fear paralyze you in your quest to try new things. And new things can be new hobbies, new things can be new adventures, travel, new career opportunities. Because yes, any new adventure will be uncomfortable. You need to learn new things. You need to adapt to a certain, culture, whether it's at work or in a different country you're going to live. But over time, you master that ability of not letting discomfort discourage you or make you feel miserable, right? You actually learn how to navigate those uncomfortable places. And that's a skill that I tell you, it's a skill that will make you a tough leader, will make you a resilient coworker. And it's a skill that you can transfer to your workplace, and you can bring that value to your organization to succeed,
Yeah. And I think as you're mentioning these things, like the ability to create community, the ability to just adapt to a new environment, all of those things are skills that they don't teach you at school, right? I mean, they can try and do a group project, but they don't really teach you these skills. These are things that you develop. And I really loved how you said, some of these things are innate in our personality, in our culture, in our upbringing. And the other thing that you mentioned is that, like they were rationing for water. There was, maybe limited electricity. And then like, I don't know, but my experience growing up in Venezuela is like, we had to deal with rationing of water. We had to deal with not having electricity and figure out what life continues, it doesn't stop. And these are things that just make you resilient, right? And I mean, it's unfortunate. Like, I don't want anybody to have to experience those things, but we did. And that makes us the people that we are today, the people that find ways to reinvent themselves, to find creative solutions to the problems that we see. And that's how we bring so much value to our teams in corporate spaces or in government spaces, because even though there were people that didn't grow up in Latin America and their parents did, in their first generation, for example, they still had to see their parents reinvent themselves and find this other way of living in a new country. And then you can see their example and you're like, if they did it, I sure can do it.
It comes to mind that we really need to first embrace the people that we have become thanks to those challenges growing up, and leverage the grit, the resilience attitude and tough attitude that has evolved because of those challenges in our past. Leverage it to better serve our organization. And I say this because I have even had conversations with my husband. My husband is not a Latino, and conversations about disadvantage and privilege and all those kind of things. Because when I think about these things, I remember people back in my town that were a lot more disadvantaged than I was. So there is always a spectrum, right? And we would go back and forth about, what he wanted to encourage me was, hey, I mean, it's just embrace it. I mean, yes, you have accomplished a lot despite of the challenges that you had to deal with. So embrace it. And as I said, like I have learned how to leverage it, to better serve the organizations that I have been involved.
Yeah, and it's what you said, those were our life circumstances. We can't really do much about it. That's what we were presented with, but it is how you react to those circumstances. And, for me, it's this chip that activates whenever I have to activate it. The life that I live here is a great life and very comfortable. But when I have to just activate the survival ship that is like, oh, there's no water. Okay, what do we do? Oh, we can boil water. Oh, you just put water on the stove and let it boil for like 30 minutes. It's good. You let it cool down,
Exactly.
It's like those things. It's like those things are like, okay, yeah, for sure. We'll just boil the water. And people are like, huh? What do? We don't have bottled water. You don't need bottled water. You can just kill the bugs yourself, Very
nice.
So yeah, I mean, I think it's one of those things. I'm proud of that, and I'm proud of knowing that I have it in me. And that whenever I need it, we can just access that area, that superpower, and be like, okay, we got this. Don't worry. We can get through this.
I like that word, superpower. It can become a superpower for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I also read on one of your articles that you write for Meta, the Meta Bulletin, that you studied chemistry partly because it was a degree that offered diverse career pathways. And the next step in your career after experiencing Mars on Earth was your work at the Bureau of Engraving and Printing, which is not necessarily a degree as a chemist that I can see, like a straight path forward. It's not that traditional. So how do you come across this opportunity, and how do you decide to take on this role that seems so far away from space exploration?
Oh, yeah. Fantastic question. So let me tell you a little bit about the Bureau of Engraving and Printing, because a lot of people may not know, what the heck is that? But this is a federal government agency here in the United States, more commonly called or known as the U.S. Money Factory. That's the factory, the manufacturing facility and place where our paper money, the bills, are printed every single day. Millions and millions and millions of bills and cash and money are printed every day. So I can say that during that job, I made a lot of money, right? I could not bring it home, but I made millions of dollars every single day. And another surprise or fun fact about it, because I didn't know it when I came across a job opening with the Bureau, I didn't know that chemists were there. So it actually is a place where lots of chemists can find job opportunities. Why? Because there are quality control and roles. A lot of analytical chemistry as well, ink chemistry. So a lot of my coworkers and my office mates had PhDs in chemistry. So that was a very, very nice surprise. But as you said, it was not a job that was related to space exploration. I did not intend or plan to work for the Bureau of Engraving and Printing, but it was 2014. It had been a year. By the time I applied and got the job, it had been a year since my HISIS Mars analog mission. During that year, I basically went back to Ithaca, taught chemistry at SUNY, at the State University of New York, Portland. And it was a year of transitions as well, because my husband and I were already talking about, hey, we have been in Ithaca for quite a while. Let's see where else we are going to go. What's our next steps? Yeah. And we had always loved the Washington, D.C. area. So I started looking for job opportunities here in Washington, D.C. And the most logical path for me was, finding a space job. So I started looking for jobs at NASA, applying to NASA jobs through the usajobs.gov website. That's the way you applied for federal government job positions. Nothing materialized, which was a very disappointing, very like, oh, well, I guess I will have to wait. Wait for the day, I will have an opportunity to work for NASA. And in that job search using the USA Jobs platform, I came across this job. I mean, I was searching for jobs for chemists and research scientists. And that's how I came across this job at the US Bureau of Engraving and Printing. And when I read it, it actually sounded like a clandestine career. Because of course, there are aspects of national security there. We need to make sure that the technologies that are being used to prevent counterfeiting of our paper money are really good technologies, right? To solve that problem. And I was like, okay, so there is like a mystery factor here that was kind of attractive at the moment. But also I saw as part of the job description, they needed a scientist with material science background, because the job covers, and tackles a lot of material science as part of the money-making process. And it was a research scientist position for a senior scientist that was also going to be involved with project management. And that caught my interest, because, I mean, I didn't, to be honest, I didn't know exactly what that entailed at the moment, but I was curious about, exploring more managerial jobs, right? And technical management jobs. And so I decided to give it a try. So I spent 5 years at the Bureau of Engraving and Printing, managing projects for anti-counterfeiting technologies. And these are projects at the intersection of material science, surface chemistry, and human factors. So human factor is another field that we as chemists may not be that familiar with. But what I did at the Mars Analog mission, running research projects that looked at either how humans interact with systems, how humans perform in this type of like Mars or simulated environments or operational environments, as we call it, that added to my skill set experience with human factors research. And when we talk about cash, we talk about this cash industry, the people that handle cash, like the cashiers and the bank tellers and the public, there is an interaction between a human and a system. In this specific example, a piece of paper with value and a piece of paper that they will need to make a decision about whether or not it's real, right on the spot. I mean, this is real, this is not. So there are human factors that go into that. And for me, it makes sense. I mean, and I am telling you a little bit more about how all these fields intersect, because it didn't make sense for a lot of people when I was telling my stories, like, but what the heck, like from Mars to working with money, what the heck? But I saw, how I could apply my technical skill set in chemistry, in material science, human factors to serve in this role. And it was 5 years of working for an industry that I was not necessarily passionate about, but it was an opportunity for me to evolve and learn how to become a project manager. And I believe that experience, it was what eventually landed me the job at NASA.
Yeah. I love how, maybe at the time it didn't quite make sense. And you mentioned this yourself. You're a dot connector, right? You connect the dots. And I can hear you say these things and how every single experience that you have had sort of feeds into the next step, even though it's not a straight pathway. And I think it's really important for us to have a goal and then have a plan for that goal, but at the same time, be flexible with the plan that we have, right? And I feel like your career has been a lot like that.
I value flexibility, and I have creative opportunity out of being flexible and choosing to be flexible. We have to be flexible, right? For the reasons that we mentioned earlier. I mean, we may have the perfect plans. We may have all the competencies to get to that end goal, but things can happen in life, and we will need to reinvent ourselves. We will need to shift a little bit our approach, but let's take advantage of those opportunities and challenges and either transitions or life at the intersections, right? So let's take advantage of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think another thing that really rings true to your experience in the printing bureau, for example, and the fact that your goal really was to work at NASA. That was the goal. And the printing bureau wasn't necessarily that, you were not looking at space. You were looking at bills, and thinking about how a cashier will look at a bill and decide, this is real or not, right? But you talk about the difference between purpose and passion. And I really like this topic because I think, especially in the States, we're sort of like trained to think that we just have to follow our passion, and that our job has to be our passion. And then we become like our job becomes our identity because that's our passion, because that's what we like. That's what we're supposed to live for. And then we get laid off. And then we have existential crisis because what am I supposed to be now if I'm not a chemist? And you talk about this differently. I came across an article at the Harvard Business Review that talked about how, yes, maybe your job can be your passion, but how about a job can just pay the bills and you can find passion somewhere else, And I think at some points in your career, you have purpose for your job, but you continue your passion for education, doing your outreach activities.
Yeah, I would say that I have learned a lot of lessons through conversations with Uber drivers. And I actually shared one experience in that article that you are mentioning, that article about balancing authenticity and adaptability. Because as you mentioned, the reality for most earthlings, most terrícolas, as we call them in Spanish, is that, sometimes we just have to do the job at hand and just need to work in a job that maybe is not like, the dream job or the ideal job. And that can be because of, I would say, and I believe that it's not because of lack of competencies, because a lot of us are highly competent and opportunities did not come our way when we needed them.
Yeah.
So a lot of things are outside our control and we just need to deal with it. And it's something that has been in my mind recently about what does passion mean? What does purpose mean? How can we balance both? How can we, pursue a passion, but pursue finding purpose as well in the things that we do? And because I have been reflecting a lot about it, I started reading a lot about this topic before I wrote this article about my self-reflections about it. And I came across like really nice, really good quotes from people that I follow, like psychologist Adam Grant, for instance. He once shared this quote: a rewarding career is more about doing what you care about than doing what you love. People who look for purpose are more successful in pursuing their passion and less likely to quit their jobs than those who look for joy. Enjoyment fades, meaning lasts. And that put in perspective a lot of things. And I believe that was part of the key for success during that time in my career, 5 years in my career, where I was not working for space related projects. I was working in a completely different industry outside the space sector. But working for the Bureau required me to be very intentional about defining the purpose that I was going to serve. And being intentional as well with reframing my mindset, right? And I found outlets as well to keep pursuing these things that I am passionate about for science outreach, educational outreach, and space. So during that time, throughout the 5 years, I kept applying for jobs, and again, nothing would materialize. So I decided, okay, so if opportunities don't come my way, then I am going to create the opportunity. And that's where I started engaging more with public speaking, which reconnected me with my passion for science communication and education. And my talks, so I give a lot of like inspirational talks as well. And I also decided to found a sole proprietorship, which is like the first step before you decide to found a company, right?
Yeah.
And started using the Science in Space sole proprietorship identity to engage with nonprofit space organizations and start creating opportunities by networking, by connecting with the industry, by going and attending space conferences. And after all, now I can say, yes, now I am an aerospace professional and I am working where I have always wanted to work and part of the space industry at this time.
Oh my gosh. So then in 2020, the pandemic sort of like made a stamp on everybody's lives, right? It changed our lives all over the world, quite literally. And then for you, it wasn't just significant because of the pandemic, but it was significant because after all this work that you've put together in your life and your career, you finally landed a job at NASA. You mentioned in one of your articles that you basically talked your way into space. And you also talk about this concept of planned serendipity, right? And so I wonder if, landing this dream job for you at NASA, did planned serendipity have a role in achieving that goal of yours?
Yeah, for sure. And planned serendipity was a concept that I came across as well years and years ago. There is a New York Times bestseller titled Get Lucky, How to Put Planned Serendipity to Work for You and Your Business. And the authors, Thor Mueller and Lane Becker, discuss and they kind of like provide, the theoretical framework about what planned serendipity is. But I realized when I learned that it's like, there is a term for what I have been doing for a very long time. And is this kind of like intentional way of thinking in your life and your career where you don't wait for the opportunity to come your way. You create opportunity, as we mentioned, through networking. And what I mean with that, in your journey of creating an opportunity outside work or at work, a way of doing that is you need to be in charge of your own narrative. There is another book titled Lead with a Story. So it's leading with your story. What's your story? I would ask people. And you are the owner of your own story. And some people in some circles call it an elevator
pitch
or pitch. Yeah. But as I mentioned, connect your own dots, because you cannot assume that your journey will make sense to others. And that this is really important for those of us that have been pursuing for quite a while career transition to work in a different field. You need to connect the dots to people, to your prospective employer, so that they understand how you will be applying and utilizing those transferable skills in your new role. So those are things that I have been learning. One way of kind of like refining your own story is talking about it. Tell your story often. And eventually you kind of like get good at how to say it, and
practice.
Yeah.
Like
how to
nobody comes in with all the answers. Yeah, no, I love that. And I think, now I think about this also. And as, people who maybe have atypical backgrounds for space, for example, and are looking for jobs. I mean, always the first step is finding that first interview, right? And then sometimes people find interviews by just applying online. Most of the time, people find interviews by talking to people who can help you pass the resume or talk to the hiring manager. And so having that story is important, even at the very beginning. But then also when you sit and talk to people at the interview, your job, and I see it as my job, my job is to help this interviewer see very easily how I'm going to be able to contribute to the project, how I'm going to bring my skills and how my skills are going to make an impact. And that is not a skill I learned before applying to jobs to get out of grad school. That is a skill I have learned by just, changing throughout my career and having to sort of convince people, give me this job. I can do it, And I think that's really, really important.
Yeah, I have been trying through my writings. I have been trying to articulate and kind of like put it in words, right? These things or pieces of advice of how to do it. Yeah. So what I have figured out, what you have figured out just by doing or by experiencing it, I have been trying to put it in writing as a way to like help us as we can, right? Our communities and those that are in need of like an aha moment, right?
For sure. And so, Yajaira, when you did work at NASA, what did you do finally in your dream job?
Yeah, so I joined NASA, as you mentioned, in the midst of the pandemic. So that was fun and challenging at the same time because all of us were asked. So I was hired and we were asked to work from home. So I was leading teams remotely during the last few years. But what a rewarding experience. So NASA back then was in need of someone with Mars experience and project management. So that now it makes sense, right? So my Mars analog mission and my project management experience from the Bureau. And I should say, or I found that opportunity through networking. I attended a space conference and met NASA people in a networking event, told my story, and they follow up. Yeah, after working for so many years, in the field of chemistry and nanotechnology, for the past few years at NASA, I started working on the big stuff, big system, rovers for the Moon and Mars. So I led engineering projects and engineering teams working on the next generation rover wheels that will be used for future Mars rovers and the Moon. And also supported the teams of roboticists and robotics engineers and aerospace engineers during test campaigns to test the lunar Viper rover, a rover that NASA will be sending to the lunar South Pole. That will be the first rover that will be mapping the water resources at the lunar South Pole in anticipation or in preparation for the crewed Artemis missions to the Moon. So I had the honor of supporting these teams as well. A dream come true. Getting to be working full-time in space projects. That was something that I have been working for very hard for many years. And finally, I had my chance to work at NASA and contribute to those missions.
I feel already like so excited, like I can feel the excitement of how maybe you felt when you finally landed that job. And it's so amazing to feel it. It's like just this feeling of accomplishment and just like having worked so hard, finally we got here. And this is exactly what we wanted to be. But then after that, it's almost like the universe itself, it just sends you curveballs and then it tells you like, okay, well, how are you going to be uncomfortable next? And so then after that, you decided to sort of let go of that dream of working at NASA, but not let go of your dream of space exploration, right? So you decided to move on to a new career because your life circumstances again, made you make a decision that was important for you. Can you talk a little more about that?
Yeah. I will tell you more about that. I need to say that for those that were born during the Apollo missions, and were like lucky to see the landing of the first man on the moon, and for those that were born after Apollo but were inspired by the Apollo missions, back then when I was 5 years old, NASA was like the only place where you could do space exploration, right? But now, for those interested in the space industry, there are tons of opportunities, both in government and in the private sector. So there is a lot going on, a lot of activities going on right now, a lot of awesome opportunities. So I had a great time at NASA. I love it. I thought that, I was going to stay there forever, but the pandemic also brought a lot of perspective about priorities as well. As much as I love space, it was the first time in almost 2 decades that I had lots of family living near me. So now I have two sisters who had babies. And I was not that, excited about moving out of Maryland to go to Ohio to work for NASA Glenn. And in the lack of, like remote work, positions available, I just decided, you know what, I want to be close to family. And I started looking, for jobs and say, okay, let me see if I find a job that is closer to me and where I am currently living and where my family is. And I found it. So I found it. Yeah. And I can tell you that transition from government to industry, and again, I am still very new in my new job at Blue Origin, but the transition has not been that drastic in the sense that once you land a job or get into the space industry sector, the nomenclature is usually the same. The process and approaches are very similar. So it's not like starting like a completely different, career path. Yeah. It's just that you are working for another entity, for another organization. And so that was not that bad. And yes, but it was still bittersweet. I loved public service. I loved it. But as I mentioned, that was one of the reasons, personal reasons. And also there was a change in the mission architecture for the Mars sample return mission. The mission I was working as a project manager. So there was a change that directly impacted my team at NASA Glenn. Yeah. On top of that, my role was a term limited appointment. And all that, made me reconsider, okay, next steps, next career steps. But I am very happy. I am very happy that I am able to be close to family while working for a different space organization.
Yeah. Again, it reminds me of this conversation and just being able to activate that adaptability, flexibility in your personality and be like, okay, does this make sense for me personally, professionally? And again, that flexibility of saying, well, maybe, my dream was to work at NASA, but really the work wasn't NASA. The dream was space exploration, and I can continue doing that somewhere else. Exactly. And I think that's very powerful, just being able to see that.
Exactly. And also, I am glad that I am at a point in my career where I feel more empowered than 20 years ago, that I am privileged to make, those type of tough decisions, because I am in a position where I can say, no, this other position or other opportunity is more suited or more suited to what I really want. So I am glad that now, I am in a position in my career where I am empowered to make those tough decisions. Yeah. and prioritize the things that really matter to me as well. I mean, space will always be important and a priority and part of my identity. But as a Latina, I said, family for me is really important. So I am glad that I was at a stage in my career where I am stable enough financially, and I am a seasoned, professional at this time of my career to just say, okay, this is no longer working for me. So let's look for another opportunity.
Yeah, what an amazing reflection to make. Yajaira, thank you so much for joining us in the podcast today.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening. If you want to put a face to the voices you just heard, follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at LatinXscan. If you have questions or feedback, you can email us at latinxscan@gmail.com. And if you want to support our project, please leave a review. We have made it easy for you and added the links to the show notes. That's it for now. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, and remember, unidos somos más.